The purpose of our review, our brief, not a review, is to discuss to find the most relevant literature on developing children as athletes, but not all the literature about children as athletes, but 5 central questions. The questions were posed by Project Play. Okay, so they gave us a question, Tom gave us questions, and we reviewed and drew upon going on to low 50s, at least 50 sources are cited here. General conclusions that we come up with is in the introduction. Sport talent development and participant talent development, not just sports for elite athletes, but participants playing sports, is pretty complex, it's pretty dynamic, and it's non-linear. Okay, so this idea of just building on skills through practice it doesn't hold up. And numerous factors play very important roles, not just one factor over another. And the bottom line is early specialization in one sport can be very problematic in just there's a few cases where it actually can be helpful. So which leads us to our first question. So I'm going to review, we had 5 questions. The first one was on early specialization. I'm going to talk about just briefly what we found, and then we're going to open it up, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, and then we'll go to question 2. We'll wrap it up and go to question 3, etc. So the first one was, what are the benefits and drawbacks of early specialization? In general, there's a couple benefits. David referred to one yesterday. Peak performance occurs in adolescence or early adulthood. Early specialization is often required, and they've seen that in diving, gymnastics. Another reason it's often cited, it's actually not a good reason, is if you want to win. So if your 12-year-old coach wants to win a national championship or a Little League World Series, the earlier you can specialize those kids, the better off you're going to have a chance to win, which obviously we think is obviously a ridiculous motive, but it is obviously happening. That's a reality. And then the third one where it can happen, and I don't think we have enough time to go into a lot of detail, but similar to what the relative age effect has on our kids, where some kids are left behind. There's this phenomenon they've identified as critical incidence. So making a national team, making a state team, making a team at all can have serious psychological benefits or drawbacks for kids. The early specializers could be argued, there's not any evidence per se, could be argued, and there's several articles, several authors that have argued, the early specializers may be better positioned to make a team like that and have therefore benefit from better coaching, better opportunities, more confidence in those that don't. So those are the three benefits we found. The consequences are numerous, and I listed them all there on towards the end. Burnout, injuries, decrease, even there's one study just published this year, increased participation across the lifespan in sports. The kids that were early specializers, they had surveyed them now as adults, and the early specializers don't play sports anymore. The kids that played multiple sports as kids are still playing sports. Now they were equally physically active, but the adult specializers, previous specializers, did not participate in sports any longer, as often as those that didn't. And then the series of studies by Neeru and his group, who we're fortunate to have, is very interesting. We just came on our radar a few weeks ago about burnout, overuse injuries, so hopefully we'll get some insights from him. So I'll throw that out there for discussion, and we'll move to the second question.
Neeru, where's Neeru? Oh, you are. Okay. What do we curious? What do we know about injury rates about involving kids who specialize early?
So our sequence of studies first tried to identify this association with an independent risk of specialization itself. And one of the problems with specialization is that it's tied in closely with how much you play and your age. And so a lot of people would argue, well, the risk of specializing in sport is just because you play a lot. And so we had found that association with about 500 tennis players. We followed about 1,200 kids, all young athletes, and we compared kids who are injured versus those presenting to sports medicine clinics to those kids who were uninjured presenting for sports physicals. And we found a highly significant risk of injury and also serious overuse injuries that would keep kids out for 1 to 6 months based on participation levels that was independent of age and independent of your hours per week. So just the fact that you specialize alone increased your risk. And that odds ratio is based anywhere from 70%, 1.70 or 70% greater to 93% greater, and particularly with that overuse injury, which is about 25% of our injuries.
I want to bring it over to Tom Aining.
Yeah, on that topic, Jesse's in certainly tennis has a lot of injuries and competes at a national level where you got to manage overuse and a lot of the girls are beat up that she competes against, but she also plays hockey, and she's played 3 years of varsity high school hockey and a lot of tennis, and she's never had an injury of any sort. And I think one of the real strong reasons for that is that she's gets off the tennis court, and gets on the ice, which is actually very non-impact and really healthy, for the body. So it's very important.
I want to ask Jess. I mean, all these adults have these ideas about specialization and youth sports today. I mean, what's been your experience? You have any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I see like most of the kids I've competed against have had at least an injury that has lasted a month, I'd say, and I've never had an injury that's put me out over about 2 days. So I think really playing two sports and strengthening different muscles and some of the same muscles too in both sports really helps prevent injury and keeps you fresh and stuff.
Does anybody know if there's maybe Neera, is there a protective benefit if you're playing multiple sports? Does it make you less injury resistant?
Thank
or
you.
make you more injury resistant?
Thank you. That's why I had my card up. Let's take it one step further. We evaluated the ratio of organized sports to free play, and we noticed in our 1,200 kid sample that organized sports was about twice as much as free play, so it was a 2-to-1 ratio. In tennis players, it was about 4 or 5-to-1. We also found that if you exceeded that ratio of 2-to-1, your risk of overuse injury and serious overuse injury was much more likely. So we think not just other sports, but free play itself may be protective of injury, and that's why I think a lot of us agree with that, and we just have a little science to back that up.
The next one's pretty easy, and then we will get into free play as question 4. Deliberate play is this called. What are the benefits and drawbacks of early sampling? I found no drawbacks to early sampling, so there's none here. You can't find them. Everything here is that I could find in the literature says it's quite a benefit. Just highlight a few, increased confidence, increased motivation to play, longer careers. For the elite athlete development group, skill transfer seems to be, so there may be some skill transfer in free play, but there's also quite a bit of evidence that free play or skill transfer playing one sport. We talked about attacking sports yesterday, and some of the key findings here in this Baker studies, really the most seminal work in this area, has shown that the transfer of skills from one sport to another is probably the most compelling reason to, even if you're training elite athletes, not just lifelong participants, to compete in more than what they call early sampling, which would be playing multiple sports prior to the age of 12. That's a definition.
Andrew, I'd be curious to tell people about your pathway a little bit. You mentioned you were, you started at a certain age in the world number 2 at 16, but maybe you can go a little bit more in depth about how you entered and left the sport.
I started fairly late. I started at age 8 when I first played tennis with my family. My parents learned how to play tennis watching tennis on TV. And at age 9, I played my first tournament. My parents didn't push me into it. It was more or less that's what the family was doing, and went and won my first tournament at age 9. At 10, I went to Australia, represented the United States in Bonnie Bell Cup. 13, I was winning 18 and under tournaments, and went to South Africa with my sister, who was 16, and played in a tournament. I won the junior tournament. They had a pro tournament the next week. They called my parents, who weren't there, because my parents couldn't afford to go to a lot of places, so I went with my sister. And the people there said, hey, would you like your daughter to play in the pro tournament? And I asked my parents if I could. It was fun. I could go on a safari if I stayed an extra week, and that was it. And we were in South Africa, a 13 and a 16-year-old, playing. I won the pro tournament and came back, played another pro tournament where you could go pre-qualifying, won 13 matches in pre-qualifying, qualifying, won the tournament, and then got entered into another 2 pro tournaments. And for me, it was that joy of playing. I played soccer they didn't have a girls team. I played soccer on a boys team that traveled. And my management group said when I turned pro at 14 I'd have to stop because I could get injured. And growing up, one of the fun things with the kids playing at the club, we'd practice for a couple hours, but then we'd go out in the field and play Nerf football, and we played tag, and we did other things, and we ran and laughed and played. And I think the biggest thing that's happening now in any kind of sport for kids is the fun factor has been left out, the enjoyment factor. And I think, there's not a study that I know of that this has actually happened, but have they actually looked at the kids that have been injured and the kids who have left? If you look at a child that's been injured, oftentimes an injury will manifest from something that is just not enjoyable. It's no longer fun. Their voice, in a sense, to get out of that sport is a physical ailment, is a physical injury. And when I turned pro at 14, I was excited. I thought, wow, this is going to be great. I'll travel the world and have a great time. And I love tennis to this day. I love tennis, but the environment was not ready for that. And I think that that's the biggest thing that's happened to all juniors and youth in general in sport is it's kind of what's happened with technology. We've advanced something, but we haven't set up any parameters. We haven't set up boundaries. I mean, they have a seated players' locker room, and again, I love tennis. There's no disrespect to anything within tennis, but there's a seated players' locker room at Grand Slams. Why isn't there a locker room for the minors, and then the adults can be in another locker room? Because if you're going to separate and let the elite have a special place, but then you're going to tell a 14-year-old it's okay, and adult behavior is very different from a child's behavior. Good adult behavior is different. Poor adult behavior, dysfunctional adult behavior is even much worse. So you're going to put a 14-year-old in an environment where perhaps there's not the best environment, and then that's where they live for their year on the circuit. So I think environment is very important. Coaching, you mentioned the coaching aspect. That's another reason kids they're just leaving the sport, they're leaving the enjoyment, and they're not necessarily going to say it. So if there is some kind of way to give an expectation or a form that's like an engagement form somehow, because coaches, and if a child goes into any activity, you go because it's fun. That's what you think. If a kid writes down, well, why are you doing this? It is fun. But that's not the same parameters for an adult. And I think that if the adults were instructed that this is the goal isn't to make an Olympic champion. The goal isn't to make a national champion. The goal is for this child to have fun. I am responsible for that. In my organization, and I know we're only supposed to be short, so I'll be short, but in 23 years and in 27 years, including research programs, and I've worked with kids with cancer and all types of diseases, healthy, all kinds, and so far, we've had a 100% safety record. If you put safety and fun, 100% fun as well. And so if you put that as your priority, that's as an adult, as a coach, as in an organization, your only priorities are that, you will produce that. But if you don't, if you allow the other aspects and just go through it, Paul mentioned when he was doing some of the organization with tennis and what could be best for the age limitations, as soon as he asked if he could give his opinion, they had him removed from the committee. So it's if the information that can be provided is not utilized, how do we expect a different result? And this is the first of a group I've been ever invited to. I'm just turned 48, and when I left the circuit, I explained, I tried to run for the board, and they said no. And I said, well, why not? And they said, you're too young to vote. And I said, but I'm not too young to play at midnight. I'm not too young to be in this environment. I'm not too young to do all this. But yet I'm too young to have an opinion on my life and the life of the others before. And so, my compliments, to Nike and Tom and the Aspen Institute and the USTA for organizing this and saying, we're going to have Jessie come here. We're going to have her dad come here. We're going to have someone like me who, my injury was at there's no other responsibility other than myself, because I'm the one who got injured. But in my situation, the environment was very conducive to behavior that is not going to allow for somebody to have a healthy environment, a healthy emotional state. And as I explained upon my departure, I said, let's set up a program. It's not going to work for any other kid to come out of here healthy. You got lucky with me to be emotionally healthy, and I'm leaving physically unhealthy. You're not going to get lucky with someone else. And it was denied. So I think, you know, that's the aspect what's happening. If we can somehow get coaches and organizations to say fun and safety, the success, the trophies, the gold medal, whatever the other goals of an organization, what they want, they will happen. Those things will happen, because a child that's having fun and is kept safe is definitely going to exceed and have a longer career and have the ability to teach others as well. So,
Great. Well, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, Paul Roeder.
Thank you. Those were great comments. The one thing that I would want to tie into as well is the comments that Dr. Molina made at our last meeting, the fun part of it. Getting kids in early will keep them in a certain sport and keep them enjoying it, but not to overlook the component of, and I think Dr. Molina said this specifically, that the fun part also helped the education and the learning process, and it helped kids learning skills better just because they're having fun. So it's not just the fun part just so it keeps people in the sport, but it's also the actual learning process that's important.
I want to go back to Mike here, but real quickly though, just keep the microphone there for a second, Paul. I wanted to ask you about the, Andrea mentioned parameters, right? You know, just like technology has sort of moved on, but have we created the parameters to sort of control some of the behavior or guide some of the behavior out there? I mean, you're familiar with the WTA's age eligibility rule, right? I read a study that you were an author on, where premature retirements fell from 7% to 1%. Based upon a rule that was introduced. What does that tell you about the value of creating minimum age standards and just, you know, aggressively creating policy around what is age appropriate?
Yeah, I think first of all it's a very complicated issue, age eligibility. The initial thought behind age eligibility was to help deal with early injuries of kids that are not physically mature enough to deal with the stresses of playing on the pro tour or playing, as Nero was saying as well, playing so many hours. And when the initial studies, this was specific to tennis, this is the Women's Tennis Association that dealt with this age eligibility rule. The initial studies that came out were that on average kids would train 4 to 5 hours per day, 7 days a week, 360 days a year, and that could lead to overuse injuries. So the idea was to help prevent some of those overuse injuries and see how we could do that with younger ages, not to have kids traveling all over the world. And it was interesting in interviewing some of the young kids, not only were they playing tournaments, but when they had time off, and this goes for the males as well as the females, and this was a specific example on the male side as well, when kids had time off, they would play exhibition matches. And so if a kid was from the United States and was invited to play in China in an exhibition match for one day, so they'd fly from San Francisco to China, play an exhibition match, the next day fly back, and somehow that was not supposedly a stress on the body because it's not a tournament. So there's so many different factors that play into this that it really makes it complicated just to put an age on it. But the idea was to really help prevent some of these injuries by limiting the amount of practice and or play at specific ages, so it would be a phase-in approach.
Right, good. Jay Coakley, I think you had your 10 card up.
Thanks. Andrea and Paul both mentioned the term fun, and we use that a lot when we talk about youth sports, and of course we want to make things fun, but the way children define fun is much different than the way adults define fun, and a lot of children define fun in different terms. So I think as we talk about this, we ought to think about what it is that children define as fun under certain circumstances, because we give lip service to this concept, but we have never really defined it. Of course we want fun, But what is fun to a 6-year-old? What's fun to a 10-year-old? What's fun to a 12-year-old? All of those things differ. So, and my research shows that that children are defining fun in ways that are antithetical to what happens in institutionalized competitive sports.
Meaning what?
Well, meaning that if I can generalize a little bit on the definition of fun, fun is that term is used when there is action, personal involvement in the action, controlled uncertainty, which is basically a challenge that I see as something that gets me immersed in this, but it doesn't overwhelm me, and playing with people who I know, friends. There's a social component to fun. So if the first thing that happens in Little League Baseball is you look for a pitcher who will pitch a no-hitter. Well, when I talk to baseball players, what are the two most fun things they do? 3: catch, hit, and run. And what do parents and adults want to do as soon as they take over baseball? Eliminate the need to catch, any hits, or any running. So what happens is that you eliminate the entire basis for fun, and then you have to have external rewards to keep them involved. Uniforms, hats, trophies. And so then you eliminate the basis for intrinsic motivation. So then you set yourself up for dropout if they don't burn out first. So we really have to pay attention to the meaning of fun rather than just using the word fun.
So is it your argument that any age-appropriate model ought to account for and even encourage unstructured, kid organized play?
Well, I'm not saying that it necessarily has to be unstructured, but in many cases, children define fun as an opportunity to live without some of the boundaries that they live with in everyday life. And parents, of course, and other adults, the first thing they do with sport is impose boundaries. And one of the reasons that we have a lot of kids who don't, if I say organized sports to, for example, 2 of my granddaughters, they will turn around and walk the other way because they don't like those boundaries. So fun for them is having an opportunity to explore who they are on their own terms, in their own time, with their own bodies, without having adults giving them a step-by-step process on how to do something correctly. They don't want to be the best they can be. We use that rhetoric, the sport rhetoric, all the time. Be the best you can be. You've got to be excellent. No, absolutely not. You have got to have fun, be able to express yourself, and if improvement is on your agenda, that's fine. But if you want to stay at the same level for your entire life and be active at that level, isn't that what we're about here? Once you add this other dimension of being the best you can be, that turns off about 50% of the young people who are eligible to participate in these organized programs. So we have to be careful about getting carried away with this sport rhetoric that assumes a context that by its very nature turns about half the children in this country off.
Jesse, you have any thoughts on that?
I just had a comment on the WTA eligibility rule that I thought it was interesting that they made this eligibility requirement that you had to be 14 to play any pro tournaments. Meanwhile, a lot of my younger friends travel all over playing full-time on the ITF junior circuit, which is almost just as grueling, and many of them travel all over the world playing all of these tournaments. Meanwhile, they can't play on the Pro Tour, which is almost the same stress level as the junior tour.
Tom?
I should have brought this up when we were went around the beginning, and we're going to say one thing we see is age inappropriate, and the my kids have all done traveling hockey because that's kind of about the only game in town there is, and one of the things that's I should have said is age inappropriate, is they go to these tournaments, whether it's the girls' team or the boys' team, and most coaches, I'm a minority coach in this, will say no swimming. So you're at the hotel, you got all these, kids, and the coach says no swimming because we got the big game. The big game is our consolation round, against Andover, and I learned a couple lessons that have guided me back when Jessie was like 10, that I think really set a stage and helped me understand youth sports a lot better. And that was, first of all, parents were like, "Really, we can go swimming?" And I'm like, I'm not the parent of your kid. Of course you can go swimming. I mean, we're here to have fun, as you say. And so, first of all, I'm one of the few coaches that says, yeah, swim as much as you want, but we got a big game. We got to rest. I don't care if you get out of the pool 5 minutes before and get there. You're having fun. So, but then we were at a tournament one time, and it was one of those Decembers, and it got really cold, and the ponds in Twin Cities area, had about 6 or 8 inches of ice. Early December, no snow, and we had a big game. Third place, Elk River tournament, right? Huge game. You guys all heard about that one, I'm sure. and I got the harebrained idea right before our big third place game. Let's go jump on the pond. All these girls, and we did. The parents thought I was absolutely bonkers. A, we got the big game. B, you're going to fall through. Well, 8 inches of ice is pretty safe bet. So anyway. The girls all went, and it was, can you attest? It was quite an experience. As far as you can skate in and back, we dulled our skates up, and we jumped in the car, and we ran into the third place game. And I still see these girls. We got 4 high schools in Rochester, so they're all playing on different teams now. And every one of them was like, the pond was so fun. That's the only, that's their only memory. They don't know that we were in the third place game or what. But, I learned then and it's guided me in hockey and in tennis. There is no such thing as a big game, or a big match. You're going out there to have fun, to improve, to try your best. And games and matches are only big before, and after they're over, they're not big anymore. And, I think if you really buy into that as a parent, and for those of you who have kids, everything feels so big when you're watching your child compete out there. But if you can really convince yourself that there's no such thing as a big game or a big match, it really separates you to let them have fun and to let them, just enjoy and improve and enjoy the journey, and, let them swim when you go to a hockey tournament and stuff like that.
I want to kind of keep us on track here, and believe it or not, we are going to be able to do that because we're going to skip the break between this session and the next one. But I do want to go back to Mike here for one final question that he researched, and then we can talk about it a little bit and then move on to Ken Martell.
Most athletes who achieved elite status as adults, college Olympics, and there's 2 paragraphs on page 2 there, played multiple sports, including 83% Division I female athletes, 70% of athletes in a recent study. I think they were UCLA athletes. Question 3, which is page 3, was on the 10,000 hour rule. All we'll say about this, because it is important, we talked about it last night, 10,000 hour notion, that there is this popular internet view of what 10,000 hours is and what it isn't. Okay, so regardless of what Gladwell says, or what Epstein says, or what Ferry says, the popular internet view is that you need 10,000 hours minimum to achieve some success. What the literature shows, and there's a handful of studies, mostly from the 80s and 90s, but it's no question there's a strong positive correlation between practice and skill development. No question. The question really is not if you need to practice, but how much and when. Okay, so we all know that. This leads into deliberate play, which was question 4. The idea of deliberate play, I think David talked about it yesterday, but the definition of it is intrinsically motivated, designed to maximize fun and enjoyment, provide immediate gratification. Minimal equipment allows for flexibility, allows participants to experiment with rules, tactics, participants. So it could be unstructured, it could be street ball, it could be backyard soccer. Those are examples. It could just be the kids before practice going out and kicking against the net back and forth. That's unstructured, practice hasn't started, but they're having a lot of fun doing that. The benefits of this, deliberate play may improve endurance, strength, motor control, emotional control, and creativity. Can lead to enhanced creativity when competing. One study found that. and even found that during deliberate play activities or unstructured free play, athletes actually spend more time on task than they do when a coach is structuring every moment, every movement in their practice. The reason I didn't want to leave out the 10,000 hours, because it is important. These concepts are all part of this. What percent should be deliberate play, what should be deliberate practice, and what should be competition, and then at what point do multiple sports play. Cote, who's probably the leading scientist in the world in this area, in a recent book chapter put out, it says on page 4, the very last paragraph, the last sentence, the last paragraph of page 4. His recommendation, him and his colleagues, is you're going to need 10,000 hours probably of activity in your sport. Some sports you need a lot more deliberate practice. We heard last night David's argument that each kid is probably individualized. Some need less, some need more. Okay, beyond that, so in general for most sports, and most American sports would fall into this, 80% of your total time spent in sports activities before the age of 12 should be free play, deliberate play, or playing multiple sports. 20% should be practice. 50-50 split between 13 and 15-year-olds, and 20% should be free play after the age of 16. 80%, once you specialize, should be on what we call deliberate practice, which is the less fun, more deliberate, more you're trying to make specific gains on a specific skill. So I would like to hear what others have to say about that. I think we were really interested in what Javier had to say, given that soccer has an excellent model in this area that they've built on LTAD, which is our last question, which we'll probably punt to Ken. But within that model, soccer is actually a little bit different, that they do want kids playing early. It's just how much and what does that play look like?
You want to take it, Javier? I mean, what is the role of deliberate play in soccer? I mean, I'm thinking of the Brazilians, whether that's a cliche or not, but maybe you can.
I think soccer is a little bit different than the sports we know. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, because I think it's an honor to be sit down here with all of you and have for once the opportunity to be surrounded from leaders from other sports. So in soccer, we don't used to look around what other sports they do. Probably Nathan or Paul, because of your background, soccer probably outside of the U.S. it means much more than here, right? If you look, for instance, the top clubs in terms of financial value in the world, we have number one in the list is Real Madrid in Spain, Manchester United, England, Barcelona in Spain, and then I think it's Yankees, 4th position, and 5th position is the Dallas Cowboys. So this is Forbes' list, it's not my list. So 3 out of 5 top organizations in terms of professional clubs, they are soccer. So it means that because they have, or we have more means, many times we don't look around as much as we should. And I think it's interesting to see what other sports they have to offer. Having said that, we are in a different situation in this country, because probably when US Soccer hired me in first place, the job, for instance, back in Spain, it was much easier, because most of the talented players, they were participating in soccer. Now, here probably, Tim, you know better than I do, but if we take the four main collective sports in high school, we have baseball, American football, basketball, and soccer. And soccer, we have only 16% of the athletes if we take all these 4 sports. So I think these figures are from 2011, 2012. Close to 400,000 kids in the country, they were playing soccer. But we know that we are not going to have the best talent Okay, we know that. If we think about this figure, 400,000, is the same figure like in Spain in the federation. So 400,000 kids, they are playing with within the federation system. But we know there the talent, we have more talent than here. Here only 16%, right?
Okay. It's a little bit different here, though, isn't it? Right? I mean, over there, I mean, I think U.S. Soccer a few years ago, I don't know if it's still the case, actually began to encourage coaches to stop trying to over-organize practices and allow kids to you know, kind of make up games themselves or turn it over to kids more, because everything's so organized over here. But is that, you know, in the European models and so forth, do they try and account for free play, or does that just happen outside of organized practice because they're kicking the ball with their uncle or their friends in the you know, in the alleyway or otherwise?
Well, that's interesting as well. Is what we call the street culture, right? Probably here is more difficult because of the structure of the society, and probably in other countries like Brazil or Spain, or this is why South American countries, they are so successful in soccer, because they have still this street culture where they go out with the friends. Sometimes when coaches, they go to South America and they are shocked the way training is not very well organized, or probably the quality of the training sessions are not that good. But that's not a big issue, because players are going to be on the street anyway playing. So they are developing that ability. Probably that is related to the 10,000 hour rule, right?
Right. So does U.S. Soccer now still encourage coaches to?
Right. So the point I was going to make is we knew that over here, we wouldn't have the best athletes, and this is what happens when we go to Europe. I take myself the national team often to Europe, because I think there is where we have the ability to compete against the best nations in the world. Mm-hmm. And we have to follow a different strategy. So if we cannot count on the best athletes, what can we do? So we can do two things. One is we can develop more skillful players, which we don't need to have the best athletes for that. And I think the Spanish national team is a good example for soccer, where probably they are not the biggest, they are not the strongest, but you can see the skill level is very high. So that's one thing. And the other thing, it was focus on being smarter tactically. So what else we can do better than other countries to perform better in the competition? And I think the coaching is a big part of that. When U.S. Soccer hired me, I was developing that model that Mike mentioned before about how to coach and how to coach age appropriate. So it's not the same to coach, and we know that these days, thankfully, that it's not the same to coach a 6-year-old than 18 years old. Mm-hmm. So we develop a model to coach, how to coach age appropriate from 6 to 18 years old. This is the main document of the curriculum. It's online, it's free. You can access through ussoccer.org. I think it's interesting because we select 4 different areas, which is the technical, the tactical, the physical, and the psychosocial. And within these elements, specific to soccer, we rate 1 to 5 what is appropriate for a specific age group from 5 to 18 years old.
Got it. Okay, good. Well, so let's Unless anybody else has any other thoughts on this, we're going to you in just a second, my friend.
All right.
All right. Yeah.
Put the sign down.
All right. So anybody else? Brian, you had your 10th card up earlier, and I'm sorry if I. Okay. Yes.
All of us are in the place of a child wanting to have fun, but in our perspective, it means having them have an enriching experience to learn a skill set and to have that be engaging and creative, and certainly without the emphasis of winning. And I think that that's a big factor too that hopefully will eventually get addressed, because if we put so much emphasis on winning and a child's having difficulty getting to that barometer, they might choose other methods to try to achieve that success rather than the hard work and the discipline. So the fun factor was just kind of, we're using fun as a generality of that's what we hope the kids will achieve, whereas we know in the subset it encompasses a lot more, the positive encouragement and having them continue. So I just wanted to address your fun aspect there.
Yeah. Nathan?
So just going back to the idea of early specialization and sampling, and the comment that we need to stop the runaway train or slow down the runaway train of youth sports, professionalization of youth sports. Want to think through the unintended consequences of encouraging parents to encourage their kids to play multiple sports, because we're assuming that there's a finite amount of time that kids will have to play sports, and we're saying, so it's 20% this, 20% this, or whatever the ratio was.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that a different reality will happen, which is kids are up in the pool at 4:30 in the morning, they're on the rink at 7 in the morning, then they have to play soccer in the evening and basketball later on. So we're not replacing specialization with sampling, we're replacing specialization with multiple specialization, because that's the only way that kids are going to, parents are going to create elite athletes out of their kids. So if the output of this conversation is we're telling parents that if they want their kid to be an Olympic hockey player, that kid also has to play netball or whatever it might be at an early age, then we are accelerating the runaway train, not slowing it down.
Right. So there needs to be a component of balance tied into what is age appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, because these kids. We already know I'm a bad parent, and Jay just reminded me of that, because my kid shouldn't be the best he can be. He should be having fun. But he's 6, and there was one day in spring where we had to go from soccer to baseball to basketball all on one Saturday morning. And then he has his violin lessons and his private Mandarin instruction and everything else that parents are getting their kids to do. And we say that there's only a certain number of hours in the day, but actually those hours are being filled up increasingly with these activities. And could we come out and say no more than 6 hours a week? I don't know. Otherwise, it's just we're just accelerating.
Are there any? Does anybody know if the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, or any other groups have any recommendations on the number of hours that kid athletes should participate?
I'm actually the liaison for AAP, Council on Sports Medicine and Fitness. And we looked at that. We want to make age-dependent hours per week recommendations on our data as well, too. We found that playing and participating, to account for what you're talking about, more hours per week than your age, also was linked to injury and overuse injury and serious overuse injury. And we're doing an interventional counseling recommendation study that would randomize kids to getting this type of counseling versus not. And it includes things like that, because what we learned from our study was that we were so proud of finding this specialization thing when we realized many kids were doing 2 or 3 sports and competing them in a single time. So another recommendation is not playing or competing in any sport more than 5 days a week to account for that. So I think we have a whole list of about 8 to 10 different recommendations we like to employ because everyone tries to game the system and try to make their kid better.
Gotcha. I want to move on here real quickly. Kristen.
Yeah, just real quick, I think the other thing that you hit on that was really important is the idea that in addition to the hours that we're recommending for them, the deliberate play concept, so the type of activities they're putting in aren't always adult-structured, adult-driven, adult models. And I think that we're making some recommendations to the parent that some of those activities, you can take them to the gym, but it might be open gym time. It might be open hours where there's not an adult saying, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. And that should be some of that recommendation as we go up too.
Got it. Okay. Colin, real quickly.
I was going to echo the same point. The unintended consequences of having potentially too much structure, and the simple thing is just to push the kids out of the house and not have the parents always defining and getting involved, letting the kids go and be creative in the backyards and enjoying making up games. And I don't think there's enough emphasis on lessening what we tell kids to do. And that in itself is one of the best things that we could do.
Well, that'll be a particular challenge in communities where parents aren't comfortable pushing their kid out. They don't have a backyard or otherwise. So how do you send them down to the park, and instead of a coach being over involved, he's just almost supervising and replicating the free play environment as best as possible, but it still feels safe to the kids. So, which we'll dive deep on that next, or the third roundtable about serving underserved communities. How do you get coaches and programs in there that makes sense? So let me just wrap up, Kurt, real quick.
Players, they say, well, the kids are coming in droves from other organized sports, and one of the reasons they are is their parents don't know anything about lacrosse, and they can't tell them that they're not practicing their headers enough, they're not working on their corner kick, they're not working on their backstroke, because they don't know anything. They don't even know enough to yell at the ref or the coach from the sideline, and that's not a coincidence. That is a big part of why lacrosse is growing like crazy, because no parents are engaged.
All right, so I want to kind of just summarize here a little bit, and then we can move on to Ken here. I mean, it sounds like, I've just been taking notes here. I mean, any model of age-appropriate play ought to take into consideration, Andrea and a number of people mentioned fun. Mike talked about the value, as well as others, about multi-sport play. That practice is important, but the building up those 10,000 hours doesn't have to happen at the early age. It's more in the adolescent years. Jay talked about free play, kid-directed play, making sure that there's room for kids to come up with their own ideas of what is fun and how to play sports. Javier talked about the value of coaching and coaches knowing how to, deliver this kind of programming. And Nathan made the great point that we, and correct me if I'm sort of misquoting here, but we need balance and controls on the number of hours each week that kids are asked to play sports. Otherwise, we're not getting anywhere at all. So, I think I hopefully captured most of the thought there.